are at the hour, so we can go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Education Summit. We're thrilled that you could join us today. My name is Sam, and I'm on the academics team here at Course Hero, and it is my great pleasure to introduce our next speakers, Christina Kennedy and Amanda Fierro. Christina earned her MA in English at CSU Fullerton. She's an associate professor at Mount San Jacinto College, where she's been teaching composition and critical thinking for the past 9 years. She enjoys using popular culture and real-world relevance to help build classroom communities. Amanda is a professor of English, literature, and ethnic studies with 8 years of teaching experience in higher education. Her research focuses on effective online teaching strategies and promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion. Before we dive into the session, just a few housekeeping notes. If you need captions, you can access them by clicking on the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom window. We also encourage you to ask any questions using the Q&A box and to upvote your favorites, and we'll do our best to address as many as possible at the end of the session. If you want access to the slides from today's presentation, those will be shared with all registrants later next week, along with a recording of the session. Now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Christina and Amanda to the virtual stage for their session, Putting Culturally Responsive Teaching and Learning into Practice. Christina and Amanda, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sam. Appreciate it. So again, welcome everybody to Putting Culturally Responsive Teaching into Practice. My name is Amanda, and I kind of have the first half of our presentation here. So for the overview of this presentation, we're going to be doing a couple of things. First, we're going to define what culturally responsive teaching is, just because we're talking about CRT. We'll do a quick activity titled What's in the Lake that helps kind of orient yourself into the need for culturally responsive teaching and its practices. We'll talk a bit about our own educational backgrounds and cultural upbringings. And then we'll take some steps to CRT to see what you could do in your classroom to kind of emulate culturally responsive teaching or just helpful strategies and teaching practices. Tina will then take the floor and talk about what tilting is and how to tilt an assignment. If you're not aware of that acronym right now, you will be by the end of this presentation, but it's not super scary, not super hard. And then, of course, as with all of our sessions today, we'll close out with a Q&A. So we're going to go ahead and get started. If you all could take out your lovely phone and you can scan this QR code that will take you to an answer garden. And answer gardens basically allow you to type in a prompt, and you can type in an answer and it'll populate on the screen for us. So we'll give you guys kind of a couple of minutes here, maybe 2 to 3, to just go ahead and scan the QR code. And your goal is to answer the question, what does culturally responsive teaching make you think of? If you're unfamiliar with the term, that's okay. Just type in whatever pops in your head, all right? Or maybe what you've heard about it. If you are super familiar, feel free to share as much as you like.
But not too much, because you only are allowed to write 20 characters, right?
Yeah.
I'll give it about a minute and then I'll check the,
It over.
yeah.
Not to bring any spoilers, but I'm already seeing some pretty good responses.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Mhm.
Let me see about pulling it up here. Oops. And we'll refresh and see what we've come up with.
Yeah, these look great so far. A lot of people are right on. Inclusion, inclusivity, respect, just inclusiveness in general. That's a big word. A safe environment.
Validating students to respect others. Really good.
You can refresh again. There'll be more answers popping up there. Respect is a big one. Yeah, more people are mentioning it.
And an ad. Okay, there we go. Oh, a lot of, and it shows us how many people have actually said that too.
Cultural
Cool.
bias. By the way, Answer Garden is a free tool to use. This is also a great way to promote culturally responsive teaching because it takes in anonymous answers to questions for those students who may be fearful to share their opinions. Great. Well, most of us nailed it on the head, which is really cool to see.
Oh, I like the beyond white.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah, yeah, very cool. Okay.
All right, thank you all for participating in that activity for us. At our institution, we had the absolute privilege, really, to hear from a lot of faculty about what they think culturally responsive teaching is. And so we have two responses here from two of the faculty at our college. The first is from Professor Henderson, and he said CRT is harmonizing material presented in class with the unique backgrounds, perspectives, and experiences of our students. Dr. Suzanne Ull said meeting students where they are at and being a better teacher. So there's a big focus from culturally responsive teaching about not just teaching and the teaching practices, but also students and their particular needs, right? That's a big trend. So we are going to talk about briefly, right, to start, what culturally responsive teaching is. So me and Tina had the absolute privilege to be on a research team at our institution to investigate best practices for culturally responsive teaching. So we found several definitions across the literature that exists, and a couple of our faculty kind of came up with this definition. So it's an inclusive, reciprocal educational approach that values diverse backgrounds, promotes self-reflection, and connects classroom content to real-life student experiences while fostering equity and building an engaged learning community. It has a couple of big framework components that you'll see across the literature. The first is that there's a huge push for self-reflection, not just for the students, but also for the faculty who are integrating it. Collaboration is a big trend. Evaluation, modification, application, revision, and consistent reassessment. You kind of want to think of CRT as a cyclical process, like a big circle, where once step one takes place, you're going through every single step over and over again. So if you can, we have just a brief discussion question. You can go ahead and put it in the chat on Zoom. What are some ways that you think you are already bringing CRT into the classroom based off of the definition that we have established here and the framework components that are listed? Collaboration. Oh, yeah, same. Self-reflection. Peer evaluation. Beautiful. There's some great responses. A lot of people are like, oh, yeah, I do these. Now, it's okay if you're perhaps struggling to answer this question because most likely you're doing CRT practices without maybe even recognizing you are, right? So a good example of one that I do is I provide a welcome letter to my students, right, to introduce them to the course, kind of shoot introduction videos, share pictures of my dog. Great. So from that research team we were a part of, we really investigated why CRT is necessary, right, across disciplines, not just to one discipline. And there were several articles and scholars who had different opinions about its necessity in higher education, but we found these two insights to be particularly impactful when defending its need. The first is that numerous studies have demonstrated that culturally responsive education can strengthen student connectedness with school and enhance the learning experience. The second is that the need for CRT in higher education has been impacted by three big areas, primarily demographic changes, historic tradition, and global society. So a good way to understand the importance of its need is through an activity called What's in the Lake. Now, if you've never heard of this analogy, I'm just going to provide some brief background about it. When you think about what's in the lake, it's an analogy that contextualizes equity gaps that are present within education. and help us understand why frameworks like CRT are necessary. So if you can, right, you want to imagine that education, the field itself, is a lake, and every piece of pollution you see in the lake is a discriminatory law or practice in education, right? As the image shows on the right, historically, there's been a ton of discriminatory laws and practices that take place within the educational space. This slide then goes over a very brief and very incomplete timeline of discriminatory laws and practices. The first, which is one of the most popular, is in 1896 with the Plessy v. Ferguson case, which upheld the separate but equal doctrine in public facilities like schools. In 1973, we have the San Antonio Independent District versus Rodriguez, where parents argued property taxes funding schools created disadvantages for children in poorer areas. The Supreme Court found that this did not violate the Equal Protection Clause and did not discriminate against people. In 1974, we've got Milliken v. Bradley, which solidified the difference between de jure segregation and de facto discrimination, where the Supreme Court then ruled that schools are not responsible for desegregation unless it was shown that there were purposefully discriminatory policies. And then this next one is a little close to mine and Tina's home. We are in the Inland Empire in Southern California, and Temecula Valley Unified School District recently required schools to inform parents of student requests to change their name and or their pronouns. So it is required by teachers to share that information. So when we think about the lake of education itself, it's not just the historical laws that have been discriminatory or anything that are contributing to that. When you think of the lake and you think of the educational space, it's also taking place within your classroom. All of these laws have had an effect in some way. In the same way, your own history with education and your students' history with education are affecting that lake constantly. So when your students come in, they're bringing in their own histories, experiences, and identities alongside them. Historically, most of these components about their life have not been affirming in the educational space. So when you think about your own class specifically, what other things might be in that lake that are possibly inhibiting students? In other words, where might there be educational barriers in our own immediate context? So you can go ahead and share in the chat if you can think of any, right? It could be a policy that your college upholds. It could be something in your own syllabus that you created that you have found to be inequitable over time. But it's important to recognize that all of these are reasons to incorporate culturally responsive teaching into your pedagogy because these barriers exist. That's a great point, Doug. As an English professor, I can empathize with that sentiment about speaking a proper English where their English is somehow wrong. Strict attendance policies that can definitely impact grade performance. No childcare. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, we used to have childcare at our institution, and then it disappeared one day. That was really disappointing. In math, our expectations that students should be at a standard level. Often that depends on their previous school experiences. Yes, very much so. Yeah, I think that happens in a lot of disciplines, but I can definitely see how that's, especially when it's a core course like that, it's
These are
tough
great
to,
responses. Requiring
yeah.
videos to be on in an synchronous class. Wow.
Yeah,
Assuming
these are
equal
beautiful
access to
answers.
internet. Yeah,
Yeah.
these are great.
Yeah. School resource officers. Yeah. Hey, we're all about talking about the controversial here, Daniel, so don't you worry. State laws. Yeah.
Textbook costs. Oh yeah.
Surgical technology. Oh, wow. Yeah.
This is great. Mental health concerns. We're not having access to enough counselors. That's a huge one for my classes, for my students.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Mhm.
Strict deadlines. Dr. Hall, yes. I'm all about the flexible deadlines. Very good.
So like, oh yeah, representation, overcrowded classrooms. Oh, 100%. We all
Sexism.
know those course caps.
Yeah.
They get
Yeah.
higher and higher every year.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing all of your responses. Like these are absolutely great, right? And these are things that are affecting the lake of our course. When we're trying to bring in, a situation where our students feel welcome and affirmed and represented, they can have these barriers that sometimes are in our control and sometimes are just not, right? And we can give as many resources as we can, but this just emphasizes the need as why being responsive, culturally responsive in your teaching practices can be so helpful, right? Being able to be flexible with deadlines or try to provide those alternative resources can make a world of difference for the student that needs it. So for this next slide, we did want to share just a bit about our own educational backgrounds to show how even your expectations and your history with academia as a professor and a scholar influences the educational space too, right? So a bit about me, right? I teach English. I have a specialization in diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism, and I'm a practicing CRT professor. But some histories and experiences that I bring into my class are that I'm a first generation student, the first in my family to go to college, go to higher ed, get a master's, get a doctorate. I have German and indigenous Mexican background. I grew up in a low socioeconomic upbringing, and I encountered a lot of reading and writing challenges throughout my childhood. And I grew up in a space where I had really high academic expectations. So one way that I've noticed like my perspective influences my classes when I was a young and naive professor, right? I thought all students approached education like me. Whereas that is definitely not the case, right? And I have to kind of remove every bias I have about seeing how education can be a tool to overcome challenges in your life and make things better. Some people may not have that same expectation of it or had the same experience as positive with education as I have. Right. For some of my identities I bring in, I'm a cisgendered BIPOC woman in higher education, which is controversial in and of itself. But that's something I constantly have to be mindful of too when I walk in front of that classroom every day.
Yeah. And I'm Christina. So I also am an English instructor, and when I was in school, my emphasis was in composition and pedagogy, and I am now a practicing CRT professor. My history and experiences. So I also am a first generation college student. I that often surprises people because I don't look like a typical first generation college student to most people's minds. Um, and I am very white. I come from Irish and Czech heritage, and my um, families have been in the US for 3 to 4 generations on either side. I grew up in very Catholic and middle class. However, I did experience challenges because just given where I grew up, where 80% of the population was white when I moved there in the 90s, um, I I didn't really fit the expectations that people had of me because I consistently was defying gender and ethnic expectations since my very young elementary school years. I just had interests and in like toys and games and music that was completely unexpected for a little white girl like me. And that, the challenges that came with that socially permeated other areas of my life as well. And then my identities, I now identify as a queer woman in higher education. And I recognize that, same as Dr. Scukanec, when I come into my classroom, I recognize that I'm bringing my experiences with education and then my whole life experiences of growing up in the same area where I teach, and all of my challenges in like the area and then in school and growing up and just being a queer woman. I understand that I'm bringing all of that into the classroom. So it is definitely important to be mindful of those elements of your identity and your sense of yourself as you, as you walk into your class on the first day and then every day that you walk in, or, the remote setting that you're in.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you, Tina. So
Mhm.
at our institution, we had the very rare, I think, opportunity to collaborate across disciplines and gather a group of faculty who got to do research over the course of like 3 or 4 months, and then another 2 or 3 months working on designing a professional development course for other faculty to take about CRT. Right? Because our institution luckily recognizes, oh, this is really significant and it helps students, it affects them positively. We want to do a PD course. So this is just a screenshot of the homepage. I got the opportunity to facilitate the course, which was taught to 10 faculty, both part-time and full-time across disciplines, right? There were people from humanities and STEM and all sorts of fields participating in this to look at ways to integrate CRT into their own classrooms. I think a common narrative that's often produced with CRT is that, oh, it's only for the humanities or it's only possible in the humanities, when that is definitely not the case, right? So we included on this slide the course learning objectives for that PT course, right? What it looked like, what faculty were going to be doing, what they were able to do. So the first one, they were able to analyze structural barriers. So kind of did a very similar what's in the lake experience, but a little bit of a deep dive to understand what historical policies in our immediate area were affecting our students, right? So the case I shared that was about Temecula Valley Unified affects all of our students that go to our college because it's all in that location. And then looked at our personal and institutional biases too, because those come into play every time we teach a class. We looked at core principles of CRT. We took a look at student success data, which can be difficult to interpret. That was a very interesting week to facilitate, but it was really good because it provided insights on, oh, what are the demographics of our students that are succeeding and what are the ones that are not? And are there trends? Surprisingly, there are always trends, right? You can typically pinpoint where some demographics are succeeding really well, others are not, right? But the big point of the course was to introduce why CRT is necessary and how it can be helpful within the educational space. So the next slide we're going to share is just about the professional development course in more detail, right? It was only a 6-week class. It wasn't like a full semester where we did it. And the big goal was that it was designed to improve and promote student success. That was what our college wanted to do, right? We were noticing that there were trends in demographics where people were succeeding and others were not, and tried to identify ways to mitigate that. It provided theoretical foundations, interactive data analysis, and immediate implementation opportunities. We got a grant, luckily, to be able to pay our participants for this course. And then the PD opportunity asked for feedback from the respondents too, right? So in the same way as in a course that does practice culturally responsive teaching, you would have students provide self-reflective opportunities and share their opinion. We did the same thing for faculty. So everything that was shared within the course was all about, oh, here's how you're going to do it in your actual class too. But the participants are later going to present this year at our college convocation and flex days in August to talk about what they learned from the experience. There's like multiple rounds of this PD course going on right now for our faculty. But the big challenge for it was during the class, during that 6 weeks, faculty needed to identify an assignment within their course to modify, and if we call it tilt, to change it so that it reflects culturally responsive teaching practices, integrate it at the same time they're taking the class, and then share the results to see, oh, did my changes actually affect my students positively or negatively? Like, what are some ways that it could be improved, et cetera, et cetera. But the course itself was built with covering kind of 6 big topics. So the first one was, of course, it's kind of very similar to our presentation where we talked about some foundations of culturally responsive teaching, did some self-reflection application. Looking at student success data is a must, right? Just because you want to help identify the trends in your classes about the certain demographics of students that are succeeding and ones that are not. We looked at cultural competence in the classroom, which is just being culturally aware of the environment your students are in, right? So if you do not perhaps live in the area your institution is at, are you aware of the things going on in that area, right, that are affecting your students immediately? We talked about the significance of feedback and improvement within CRT, which is a must. It's like a constant need for evaluation and revision. And then, of course, they had like a presentation at the end. So within the research components, we found all of these really big things, right? When we did all of the research to establish this course, in order to have effective CRT, you basically need this list, right? A really clear theoretical understanding, vulnerable self-reflection, collaboration, a look at your student success data, peer review, continuous feedback, regular reflection and revision. Knowing your students means better teaching. So having a better understanding of how you to get to know your students on a personal level and ways to teach them better as a result. And then culturally responsive teaching is often correlated with higher academic achievement from various research studies. So as a result of the course from facilitating it, there were some trends I saw that was really helpful and insightful to learn even just about our faculty. But in the same way, faculty were very much students, right? So there was a constant check for understanding. And you'll have to forgive me in the chat. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but DPs, right? CRT is about culturally responsive teaching, not critical race theory. That was a big clarification we had to use within the class because people saw CRT and immediately thought critical race theory, right? When we're talking about culturally responsive teaching. And the two are very different. So in the course, you had to really model what CRT was, whether that was an announcements, assignments, discussion, participation, grading, anything, right? So it required a lot of time and a lot of genuine feedback. You definitely need to exhibit patience, especially in your own class too, right? When practicing this type of model, because you will answer more questions and explain in more ways than you probably anticipated. You have to provide opportunities for open dialogue to let them share all the thoughts going on in their head about the different assignments or about the different concepts being learned. Providing timely feedback was also a must, especially because learning about culturally responsive teaching and practicing it can be really unfamiliar, especially if people have a history of having a very structured and impersonal education, right? Where their teachers perhaps didn't open up as openly or didn't encourage them to share their thoughts as openly. So really being patient and letting them have that space was really important because not all students get that type of education. Consistent encouragement was a must. And then overall from the course, which was really nice, there was a 100% success rate. Every faculty member left with like actual applicable tools to use, which we're going to share with you in the next coming slides, and clear self-reflective and course application.
So thank you, Dr. Scukanec. So I'll be taking over pretty much the latter half of the presentation here. And so we wanted to just give you an overview of what the journey to culturally responsive teaching looks like. But it is also important to note that it really is about the journey, not the destination here, because it is a cyclical process and it's a cyclical journey. So you never actually end up reaching this destination of, I have done everything that I possibly could do to make my course culturally responsive. I've done it all. I'm including everything and everyone, and there's no other changes I'll ever need to make to my class ever again. Unfortunately, it is one of those elements of teaching where your work is never done. So the steps to it, the first thing that we suggest is make sure that you do some self-reflection. Since, as we noted earlier, we bring very much a lot of our self into our classrooms. So it's important to recognize and reflect on what parts of your identity do you include in your classroom? And sometimes those elements are, you're unintentionally including them. It's just a part of who you are, and you're the instructor, so that's what happens, right? So just reflecting on that and figuring out, okay, like what can we do? What can I do to make some adjustments to be more inclusive or more open, instead of just limiting course assignments, activities, reading materials and such based on things that I'm familiar with. This is what I've taught before. So we're doing self-reflection initially, right? And then the next thing you should do is look at your student success data. So to see your student success data, you would have to contact your Department of Institutional Research. We have a question in the Q&A that says, what's included in your student success data? A lot of things, at least with our institution. At our institution, it's open and free to access. Like, you can access any instructor's data. You don't have to log in or anything. It's just open for anyone to take a look at. And you can look at different semesters that you've taught and your successes for each semester. You can look at your success rates for a specific course that you teach over the course of several semesters. And it's this data that you can adjust the settings and do advanced searches, that it provides you with all different types of information. You can divide it up by, maybe you want to see what ethnic background, like what group of people from a certain ethnic background have the lowest success rate in your courses. You can look at that and realize, oh, and maybe you have Latina or Latinx students that have the lowest success rates between them and Black or African American students, white students, Asian Pacific Islander students, and so on. And you can look at that data of yours and examine it and figure out, okay, now that I've seen this, what can I be doing in my class to make changes to help that specific group be more successful in the course? Oftentimes, it's looking at your student success data can be a humbling experience. I know sometimes it can be a little controversial, and there's sometimes this pushback from faculty once they look at their success data. But it's not meant to be a time where you get to see all the things you're doing wrong and someone's going to berate you for it. It's really a matter of looking at it and figuring out, okay, how can I improve? So taking a positive perspective on it from the very beginning makes all the difference in how you can use that data to help your students be successful, because that's what this is all about anyway, right? So then you would look at understanding cultural competence, which really just means you need to reflect and make sure that you're being mindful of the diverse cultures that are brought into the class, not just your own, but yours and the students' backgrounds. And I mean, if you've been teaching at your college campus long enough, you probably have an understanding already of the demographics of the campus. But each class varies a little with the demographics, that they don't always directly reflect exactly what we see on the campus as a whole. So just being mindful of that is important too. You should also tilt your assignments, and tilting we'll talk about on the next slide, but it stands for transparency in learning and teaching. And after you've tilted assignments, you should review feedback that you get from students, and you could even receive feedback from your colleagues in the same discipline, in other disciplines, and then revise your assignments. And then, in the wonderful words of Brian McKnight, if ever I believe my work is done, I'll start right back at one. So you just start over again, rinse and repeat, and continue that journey to ensure that your courses continuously become more culturally responsive as time goes on. So again, tilting stands for transparency in learning and teaching. And so what this means, the goal of tilting is it's aimed at advancing equity in higher education. And when you tilt an assignment, the main goal is to have 3 components of each assignment as the instructions are. So whether it's a discussion board for an online class, if it's an activity that you're putting on a Google slide for your entire class and you're in a face-to-face setting, an essay prompt, just a speech prompt, whatever it is, so you should have the purpose, the task, and the criteria. And it should be broken up into this, and it doesn't have to be specifically these words of purpose, task, and criteria, but having that structure helps students better move through the assignment prompt and understand what's expected of them. So the purpose, often we include just our course learning objectives, or what's the whole point of this assignment? What am I supposed to be doing with this assignment? And that's what you would include there. The task is the specifics of what actually needs to happen in this assignment, what questions they would need to address, and so on. And the criteria would be, how will this be assessed, right? So you could also, if you're a rubric person, you could say this assignment's worth 25 points. This is the rubric and how it will be assessed. So these transparent and equity focused components also can be incorporated, like I said, activities, discussions, even something as simple as a welcome letter, where you could say the purpose of this welcome letter is to get you acquainted with the course or give you a brief introduction of the course before we get started. And then this is what you would need to do before we begin the course, like get textbooks or make sure that you can successfully log into Canvas or whatever LMS system your school is using. And then with a welcome letter, there probably wouldn't be criteria, but you might just have final reminders of here's the upcoming dates that are important for you to remember. So over here, we have a QR code that has a tilted assignment template for you. So feel free to scan that if you would like. And so again, like with this, you're choosing, so when you tilt an assignment, what you're doing is just choosing some sort of assignment that you have and create the 3 sections in the assignment where you have the purpose, the task, and the criteria. So again, with the purpose, make sure that when you are providing the purpose, you can list the learning objectives on their own. And but what would be even better is if you include student-friendly language, because oftentimes we as the instructor, we understand what the learning objective is here, but providing it in with student-friendly language and diction and syntax and such might make all the difference in what students will actually, how students will actually understand what you're sharing with them, right? And then the same thing with the task too. It might be better for you to provide it in student-friendly language. Obviously, if you include any terms that are specific to the discipline or ones that you have recently introduced to the students, you might want to include definitions or links to definitions of those words, just so they can easily access the information and comprehend it without feeling lost, scared, or confused. Let's see. And then of course, like if you have, so in addition to rubrics, if you have any examples of student assignments that for that same assignment, it's always a great spot to include those. If you're teaching this class in an online setting and maybe the course or the assignment is a quiz or a discussion board, you could include links that explain, hey, here's how you add something to a discussion board, or here's how you include an image in a discussion board if that's the assignment that they're being tasked with. So just providing them with more guidance can make all the difference in their success with the assignment, and then of course ultimately with the entire class. So what I'm going to show you now are 3 different examples of assignments with before and afters of those assignments. So these are actual tilted assignments that were tilted in the PD culturally responsive teaching course that we helped to design. And oftentimes we have faculty that we interact with that say, oh, well, I don't see how CRT can translate into my class because I teach this discipline and I don't know how I could include things like that. But these examples are from this is from a psychology course, and then the next one is a math one, and the next one is a communications one. So those are, quite different disciplines, but they all have found ways to make their assignments more culturally responsive. So we do have some time. So with this first example, it says, the assignment says, please answer the following questions as they relate to the chapter section, lecture slides, and videos pertaining to bystander effect. Please make sure you review all of the related material before attempting to answer the homework questions. The assignment is not timed, but you will only have one opportunity to complete it. 7 questions, 3 points per question, MC, TF, and fill in the blank format, 21 points possible. So when I first read this, I actually saw MC, and it took me a second to realize that that meant multiple choice. So already just based on that alone, I thought, well, if it took me a second to figure out what that meant, are students going to know what that means? And this has instructions, but it could use more clarity and direction. So what this instructor ended up doing was dividing it up by purpose, task, and criteria. And it looks much more clean and organized. And so it's much easier for the students to figure out, okay, what do I need to be doing here? Here's the instructions. And then here is the rubric. So I don't know if I really need to read through the whole thing, but yeah, it's providing a little bit of an introduction too that says, hey, in chapter 12 specifically, if you want to refer back to it, now you have information on where it is, right? We covered the bystander effect and the events. And so then we move down to the purpose, and it provides us with this assignment is to test your awareness of the predictors of the bystander effect, which can keep bystanders from engaging in helping behavior when they witness an emergency. So now we understand why we're doing this assignment. And then the instructions, and then we have our rubric. This next assignment was for a math class, and this is for a discussion board post. So the students are tasked, and this one is organized and has nice bullet points here that shows you clearly the things that you should be touching on when you make your post in the discussion board. And then it provides you with instructions on how to create a response post. And so what this says is select any one of the mathematicians from the following list. Please do not pick the same mathematician that another student has already chosen. And then after picking the mathematician, please research, find, and post the following information about your chosen mathematician. So we have name of their name, date of birth, date of death, brief bio, just about their family, identity, what makes them unique, mathematical accomplishments, and then their area of expertise. And so this is good, but how can we make this assignment more culturally responsive? And what this math instructor did, this is a lot of information, but it's largely the same with the exception of what's highlighted right here. So this math instructor included what social, cultural, and economic barriers did this person face? How were these barriers overcome? And how can we apply this wisdom? And then, oh, and then it also says the instructor may award additional credit if your coverage is of very high quality. And then how did the person identify their cultural, ethnic, religious, and linguistic backgrounds? What were some of the person's expressed values? Include a picture. That's great too, because then we're actually going to see visuals. So it's not just strictly written things that are written material that's culturally responsive, but we're actually seeing more and like engaging other learning styles and such too. So and then there's recommendations on what else you could do. Add a voice recording in your preferred language. How cool is that? And then you may add graphics related to the subject's culture and background. So this definitely adds much more and makes the assignment much more engaging. And so just adding a little bit to your assignment sometimes can make all the difference in how culturally responsive it is. And then finally, we have this speech assignment for our communications course. It says online pitch speech where you explain the most important things you have learned in this class about public speaking. It can be done as a mock commercial or a PowerPoint presentation to accompany. These speeches must be recorded and delivered in front of a small audience of 3 to 4 family members. You will need to pan the audience for me to see them. The audience can be live where you deliver the speech in front of them or via Zoom where everyone logs on and you record the session. There is no outline due for this speech. The pitch speech should be about 3 to 4 minutes in length. Please let me know if you have any questions. So this assignment, again, could use a little more detail and direction, but one of the major issues that I noticed with this assignment is that the instructor is assuming that the student has 3 to 4 family members, or, there's 3 to 4 people that they can rely on to sit and listen to them present a speech, whether it's via Zoom or in a face-to-face setting. And not everybody has that. Not everybody has 3 to 4 family members that, maybe a lot of people have 3 to 4 family members, but how many of those family members, what's the probability that they'll all actually be willing to sit for you while you're doing your homework? And so it's limiting for students. And if you're in a space as a student who may not have access to 3 to 4 people in that regard, that might be challenging and then awkward for you to talk about with the instructor and say, hey, like, I can't meet the requirement of the people that I need for this. So what this instructor did instead is include, they readjusted the assignment to purpose, task, and criteria, which was great. And then they added, I understand that not everyone may have access to an audience for this assignment. If you find it challenging to gather 3 to 4 people, you're welcome to invite me to watch your speech via Zoom. So that does help the situation a little bit. If you would like to see some more tilted examples, there's a QR code here that you can scan. Almost said click. So we'll give you a moment to scan that.
I also put it in the chat, Tina.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Cool. So that is in the chat if you didn't get a chance to scan it. So now we're ready for Q&A. Let's see. So if you have questions. Let's see. Looks like Amanda touched on all of those. Let's see. Does anybody have any other questions?
I believe most of the questions were answered in real time, but
Yeah.
I think Susan might have a question. It's great to tilt an assignment, but I
Yeah.
don't understand, for example, why the student who has access to 3 to 4 people can feel free to submit asynchronously versus the student who has to Zoom.
Oh, I think, let's see, maybe I misread the assignment, but I thought it was the student was supposed to record the session via Zoom. Was that right, Amanda?
Yeah, so either if they had access to 3 or 4 people, they could either hold it over Zoom or hold it live, pan them, however they wanted to do it. Or the instructor could log on to Zoom with the student and serve as their audience, right? And act the same way an audience member would.
Yeah. So either way, they would have to record their speech and then submit it somehow through their learning management system online. So they would end up ultimately doing their speech live with their instructor and then submitting it for the instructor to look at too. What was on the last screen?
Our contact info.
Oh,
Yeah, and just a reminder for folks, we're going to send the presentation and the recordings later next week, so you'll have access to all of that.
cool.
Thank you so much, Christina and Amanda, for sharing. In the meantime, I invite everyone here to fill out our feedback survey, which we will email, but I will also share a link here. Thank you all again for coming today. We've loved seeing all the discussion and the support for each other. And I hope you all have a fantastic weekend.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for attending.
Thank you. And feel free to reach out. I'll answer your email.
Yeah, same. Any questions, concerns, resources that you'd like on CRT, we're happy to send them your way.
100%.
So much.